Imagine being thrown out into the cold by the person who once promised to love you forever. Imagine the weight of rejection crushing your chest, not because of something you did, but because of something your body cannot do. Claire stood in the middle of the empty street, her breath turning into white clouds in the frozen air, her hands trembling as they gripped the handle of a worn suitcase. Behind her, the door of the house she once called home slammed shut with a sound that echoed like the final word in a trial she never asked to attend. Her husband's voice still rang in her ears, sharp and cold as the wind cutting through her coat. "A woman who can't give me children is worthless." The words didn't just sting, they buried themselves deep, like shards of glass pressed into skin. She stumbled forward, her legs weak, her vision blurred by tears that froze before they could fall. The snow beneath her feet crunched with every step, and the world around her felt impossibly vast and impossibly empty. She had nowhere to go, no family to call, no friend to run to, just the bitter taste of shame and the overwhelming silence of being unwanted. Claire's foot caught on the uneven pavement, and she fell hard onto her knees, the suitcase tumbling beside her. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't move. She couldn't. For a moment, she wondered if this was how her story would end, alone in the snow with nothing left to hold on to. Then, headlights pierced through the fog. A car slowed to a stop just a few feet away. The engine hummed softly, almost like a question hanging in the air. Claire lifted her head, squinting against the light, and saw the door open. A man stepped out, tall, steady, with eyes that held something she hadn't seen in a long time: concern. Behind him, two small faces peered through the back window, curious and cautious. The man crouched down in front of her, his voice low and gentle, as if he were afraid of startling a wounded animal. "You look like you need help," he said. Then, after a pause that felt like the space between lightning and thunder, he asked the question that would change everything. "Would you like to come with me?" Claire didn't know what made her say yes. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had settled into her bones, or the way the man's voice carried no judgment, no expectation, just an offering, quiet and sincere. She nodded, barely able to form words, and he helped her to her feet with a steady hand that felt warmer than anything she'd touched in months. He picked up her suitcase without hesitation, as if it weighed nothing, and guided her toward the car. The two children in the back seat shifted slightly, their wide eyes watching her with a mixture of curiosity and something softer, something that looked almost like recognition, as if they, too, knew what it felt like to be lost. His name was Gabriel Huxley. She learned this as they drove through the quiet streets, the heater humming softly, filling the car with warmth that slowly began to thaw the cold lodge deep in her chest. He was a businessman, he said, his voice calm and measured, but there was a tiredness in his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and responsibilities carried alone. The children were his: Liam, 8 years old, with sandy hair and a shy smile that he kept tucked behind his hands, and Emily, 13, with sharp, observant eyes that seemed to see more than most adults ever would. They didn't speak much, but their presence filled the car with a kind of gentle stillness, the kind that only comes from people who have learned to be careful with their hearts. Gabriel told her he would offer her a place to stay for the night. Just one night, nothing more. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press her for explanations. He simply drove, his hands steady on the wheel, and Claire found herself exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. She didn't know why this stranger had stopped for her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But as the car turned down a tree-lined street and pulled up to a modest house with warm lights glowing in the windows, she felt something fragile and unfamiliar begin to stir inside her chest. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. It was the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story after all. The house smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke, a combination so warm and inviting that Claire felt her throat tighten the moment she stepped inside. It wasn't a grand place, just a simple home with worn furniture and children's drawings pinned to the refrigerator, but it radiated something she hadn't felt in years: life. The fireplace crackled softly in the living room, casting golden light across the walls, and somewhere in the kitchen, a pot of soup sat simmering on the stove. Gabriel set her suitcase down by the door and gestured toward the couch, his movements unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world to make sure she felt safe. "Sit," he said gently. "I'll get you something warm to drink." Liam appeared beside her before she could even settle into the cushions, his small hands clutching a thick, knitted blanket. He held it out to her with a shyness that made her heart ache, his eyes darting between her face and the floor as if he wasn't sure whether he was doing the right thing. "You looked cold," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire took the blanket from him, her fingers brushing against his for just a moment, and she wrapped it around her shoulders like armor. "Thank you," she whispered back, and the boy's face lit up with a smile so pure and unguarded that she had to look away to keep from crying. It was such a small gesture, this offering of warmth, but it felt monumental, like the first crack of light breaking through a wall she had built around herself for far too long. Emily stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching Claire with the kind of careful scrutiny only a teenage girl could manage. She didn't smile, but there was no hostility in her gaze, just a quiet assessment, as if she were trying to decide whether this stranger in their home was someone worth trusting. Gabriel returned with a mug of tea, steam rising from the surface in delicate curls, and he placed it in Claire's hands with a nod. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady and sure, and something about the way he said it made her believe him. She looked around the room, at the photos on the mantel, at the children's toys scattered across the floor, at the empty chair by the fire that seemed to hold the memory of someone no longer there, and she realized that this family, too, had known loss. They, too, had learned how to survive in the aftermath of something broken. And maybe, just maybe, that was why they had opened their door to her. Claire woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, and for a brief, disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories returned. The cold street, the stranger's car, the warmth of the blanket Liam had given her. And she sat up slowly, her body still aching from the night before. The house was quiet, but not empty. She could hear the soft clatter of dishes downstairs, the murmur of voices, the rhythm of a morning routine that had been running long before she arrived. She should leave, she thought. She should thank them and go. But when she stood and caught sight of herself in the small mirror by the bed, she saw someone she barely recognized, a woman hollowed out by rejection, yes, but also a woman who had survived the night, and that somehow felt like enough to take the next step. She found Gabriel in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with the focused precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Liam sat at the table, swinging his legs and drawing with crayons, while Emily poured orange juice into mismatched glasses. They all looked up when Claire appeared in the doorway, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Gabriel smiled, small but genuine, and gestured toward the table. "Hungry?" he asked. Claire hesitated, her instinct to decline still strong, but something about the way they were all looking at her, like she belonged in that space, made her nod instead. She sat down, and Liam immediately slid a drawing across the table toward her. It was a house, bright and crooked, with stick figures standing in front of it. "That's us," he said proudly, pointing to each figure. "And that's you." Her throat tightened. She hadn't even been here a full day, and already this child had made room for her in his world. After breakfast, Claire couldn't sit still. She felt the weight of their kindness pressing against her chest, and the only way she knew how to repay it was through action. So she began to move quietly through the house, gathering dishes, wiping down counters, folding the blanket she had slept with. Gabriel noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything, but he didn't stop her. He simply watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable, as she restored order to a space that had clearly been running on autopilot for too long. Emily helped without being asked, drying plates and stacking them in the cupboard, and the two of them worked side by side in a comfortable silence that felt almost like understanding. When Claire organized the living room, she found a framed photo tucked behind a stack of books, a woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, standing beside Gabriel and holding both children close. She stared at it for a long moment, her heart aching for the absence she could feel in every corner of this home. Then she placed the photo back on the mantel, where it belonged, and continued her work. She didn't know it yet, but the house was already beginning to change. With every small act of care, with every quiet gesture of presence, Claire was weaving herself into the fabric of their lives. And they, without even realizing it, were weaving her into theirs. Days turned into a week, and the week stretched into something longer, something Claire hadn't dared to name. Gabriel never asked her to leave. In fact, he did the opposite. One evening, as she folded laundry in the living room while the children did their homework at the table, he approached her with a kind of quiet resolve in his eyes. "I have a proposition," he said, and Claire's heart dropped, bracing for the inevitable rejection she had learned to expect. But instead, he offered her something she hadn't anticipated: a job. Not charity, not pity. A real position as his household assistant, someone to help with the children, the home, the daily rhythms that had become too much for one person to manage alone. He named a salary that was fair, generous even, and he looked at her with the kind of respect she had forgotten she deserved. "You've already been doing this," he said simply. "I'd like to make it official, if you want to stay." Claire felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been sealed shut for so long, she had forgotten it was there. She said yes, her voice barely steady, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of purpose settle onto her shoulders. It wasn't just the job, it was the recognition that she had value, that her presence mattered, that she could contribute something meaningful to the world even if her body couldn't give what society had told her it should. She moved into the small guest room officially, unpacking the suitcase she had been living out of, and with each item she placed in a drawer, she felt a little more grounded, a little more real. The house responded to her in kind. Meals became more thoughtful, routines became smoother, the children's laughter came more easily, and Claire, slowly but surely, began to remember what it felt like to be needed, not as an obligation, but as a choice. The conversations came gradually, unfolding in the quiet moments between tasks. One night, as she and Gabriel cleaned up after dinner, he asked her about her past, not intrusively, but with the kind of gentle curiosity that invited honesty without demanding it. She told him, her voice low and careful, about the years of trying, the doctor's appointments, the crushing disappointment that came month after month. She told him about the way her husband's love had curdled into resentment, how he had blamed her for something she couldn't control, how he had eventually thrown her out like she was nothing more than a broken appliance. Gabriel listened without interrupting, his hands moving steadily through the soapy water, and when she finished, he didn't offer empty reassurances or try to fix what couldn't be fixed. He simply said, "You didn't deserve that." And the simplicity of those words, the quiet certainty in his voice, made something inside her begin to heal. She wasn't broken. She had been treated as if she were, but that was his failure, not hers. And here, in this house with this man and these children, she was learning that her worth had never been tied to what her body could or couldn't do. Her worth was in her presence, her care, her capacity to love and be loved in return. And that, she realized, was more than enough. The children became the unexpected architects of Claire's healing. Liam, with his boundless energy and unfiltered affection, began seeking her out for everything: help with his spelling homework, someone to listen to his elaborate stories about dragons and superheroes, a presence to sit beside him during the quiet moments before bed. He started calling her Aunt Claire without any prompting, the title slipping from his lips as naturally as breathing. And each time she heard it, her heart swelled with a warmth she hadn't known she was capable of feeling anymore. She braided his hair when it got too long, kissed scraped knees when he fell off his bike, and held him close when nightmares pulled him from sleep. And in those moments, she understood something profound. Motherhood had never been about biology. It had always been about showing up, about being present, about loving someone so fiercely that they felt safe enough to be themselves. Emily was harder to reach, but Claire didn't push. She simply made herself available, a steady presence in the background of the girl's turbulent teenage world. And then, one evening, Emily came to her. It was late, the house dark except for the soft glow of the kitchen light, and Claire was sitting at the table with a cup of tea when Emily appeared in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something fragile together. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice small and uncertain. Claire nodded, and Emily sat down across from her, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. "Do you ever feel like you're replacing someone?" she asked, and Claire's breath caught. She knew immediately what Emily was asking, whether Claire's presence in their home was erasing the memory of the woman who had come before her. Claire reached across the table and took Emily's hand, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm not here to replace your mother," she said softly. "No one ever could. She was yours in a way that no one else will ever be." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and Claire continued, her voice steady and warm. "But I think there's room in a heart for more than one kind of love. Your mom will always be with you. And I'm just here to help fill the spaces where it hurts, if you'll let me." Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. And then she did something Claire hadn't expected. She stood up, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around Claire in a tight, desperate hug. Claire held her, this girl who had lost so much, and felt her own tears fall silently into Emily's hair. They stayed like that for a long time, two souls holding each other up in the quiet darkness. And when they finally pulled apart, something had shifted. Emily looked at her with eyes that no longer held suspicion or caution. She looked at her with trust, with affection, with the beginning of something that felt an awful lot like family. The house transformed in ways that were both visible and invisible. There were more smiles, more laughter, more moments of connection that felt effortless and true. Gabriel began to linger in the kitchen after the children went to bed, talking with Claire about everything and nothing, books they'd read, dreams they'd abandoned, fears they carried. The conversations were easy, flowing like water over smooth stones, and Claire found herself looking forward to those quiet hours more than she wanted to admit. She watched the way he moved through the world, steady and kind, carrying his grief with grace. And she saw in him a reflection of her own journey, someone who had been broken and was learning slowly how to be whole again. The house, once marked by absence, now hummed with presence. It was brighter, warmer, more alive. And Claire realized with a mix of wonder and fear that she had stopped thinking of this place as temporary. She had started thinking of it as home. The news came on a Tuesday evening, delivered with the kind of careful neutrality that only Gabriel could manage when he was trying to hide how much something mattered. He had been offered a major contract, 6 months in New York, a project that could change the trajectory of his career, secure his children's future, and provide opportunities he couldn't afford to pass up. He told Claire over dinner, his voice measured and professional, as if he were discussing a business transaction rather than something that would upend everything they had quietly built together. Liam's fork clattered against his plate. Emily went still, her eyes darting between her father and Claire felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the fragile sense of belonging she had nurtured suddenly feeling as insubstantial as smoke. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Claire sat alone in the living room, staring at the fire as it burned low in the hearth. She knew what this meant. Gabriel would go to New York, take the children with him, and she would be left behind, back to square one, back to being unwanted, unnecessary, alone. The thought hollowed her out. She had allowed herself to believe, foolishly perhaps, that she had finally found a place where she mattered. But she wasn't family. She was an employee, and employees could be replaced. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces that felt like they were coming apart, and wondered how she had let herself become so vulnerable again. She had promised herself she would never give anyone the power to hurt her like this. And yet here she was, aching at the thought of losing people who had never truly been hers to begin with. Gabriel found her there an hour later, still sitting in the dimming light, her face a careful mask of composure. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, almost hesitantly, he said, "I don't want to do this alone." Claire turned to look at him, confusion flickering across her face, and he continued, his voice raw with something she hadn't heard from him before. Vulnerability. "The kids need you. They've come alive again since you've been here. And He stopped, struggling with words that seemed too big to hold. "I don't know how to do this without you anymore." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Gabriel met her eyes, and in them she saw everything he wasn't saying, the fear, the hope, the feelings that had been growing between them like roots beneath the surface. "Come with us," he said, "to New York, not as an employee, as part of this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a tangle of emotions rising in her throat, joy, terror, disbelief. "Gabriel, I can't," she started, but he shook his head. "You can," he said firmly. "You already are. You've been part of this family for months now. The only person who doesn't see it is you." Claire looked away, her hands trembling in her lap. "What if I'm not enough?" she whispered, the words scraping out of her like shards of glass. "What if you realize I can't give you what you need? What if—" Gabriel reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and steady, grounding her in the present moment. "Claire," he said softly, and the way he said her name felt like an anchor. "You've already given us everything we needed. You brought light back into this house. You made my children feel safe again. You made me remember what it feels like to not carry everything alone." He paused, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, because that's more than enough." Claire said yes that night, but in the days that followed, the weight of her decision settled over her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She moved through the house with a careful distance, second-guessing every gesture, every word, every moment of connection. The old voices returned, the ones that told her she was broken, insufficient, unworthy of the love being offered to her. She watched Gabriel with the children, saw the easy rhythm of their bond, and felt like an intruder trying to wedge herself into a story that had already been written. She imagined a future where they realized their mistake, where they looked at her one day and saw what her ex-husband had seen, a woman who couldn't give them what they truly needed. The fear was relentless, gnawing at her resolve, whispering that she should leave before they had the chance to send her away. Emily noticed first. She always did. One afternoon, As Claire folded laundry in silence, Emily sat down beside her, her long legs tucked beneath her, her expression thoughtful and a little sad. "You're pulling away," she said quietly, not as an accusation but as an observation. Claire's hands stilled on the fabric in her lap, and she didn't deny it. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what?" Emily asked. Claire looked at her, this girl who had learned to navigate loss with such grace, and felt her throat tighten. "That I'm not enough for you, for any of you. That one day you'll realize you deserve someone better, someone whole." The words hung in the air between them, raw and painful, and Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing what Claire had just confessed. Then Emily reached out and took Claire's hand, holding it between both of hers with a tenderness that belied her age. "My mom used to say something," she began, her voice soft but steady. "She said that families aren't built by blood or biology. They're built by the people who show up, who stay, who choose to love even when it's hard." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and Emily continued, her own voice trembling now. "You think you're not enough because you can't have kids. But Claire, you've been more of a mother to me and Liam than anyone could have been. You didn't give birth to us, but you chose us. Every single day you choose us. And that's what makes you family." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek, then another, and Emily squeezed her hand tighter. "You're not taking my mom's place," she said, her voice breaking. "You're helping to fill the space where it hurts, and that's not less than. That's everything." Claire pulled Emily into her arms, holding her close as they both cried, tears of grief, of healing, of love that had been growing quietly in the spaces between them. When they finally pulled apart, Emily smiled through her tears, a smile that held all the hope and resilience of someone who had learned that love comes in many forms, and all of them are valid. Claire wiped her eyes, feeling something shift inside her, a loosening of the grip fear had held on her heart. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe she had been measuring herself against the wrong standard all along. Maybe her worth wasn't determined by what she couldn't do, but by what she had already done, by the love she had given freely, by the ways she had shown up, by the choice she made every day to be present in the lives of people who had become her own. And maybe, just maybe, that was more than enough. Claire said yes that night, but in the days that followed, the weight of her decision settled over her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She moved through the house with a careful distance, second-guessing every gesture, every word, every moment of connection. The old voices returned, the ones that told her she was broken, insufficient, unworthy of the love being offered to her. She watched Gabriel with the children, saw the easy rhythm of their bond, and felt like an intruder trying to wedge herself into a story that had already been written. She imagined a future where they realized their mistake, where they looked at her one day and saw what her ex-husband had seen, a woman who couldn't give them what they truly needed. The fear was relentless, gnawing at her resolve, whispering that she should leave before they had the chance to send her away. Emily noticed first. She always did. One afternoon, as Claire folded laundry in silence, Emily sat down beside her, her long legs tucked beneath her, her expression thoughtful and a little sad. "You're pulling away," she said quietly, not as an accusation, but as an observation. Claire's hands stilled on the fabric in her lap, and she didn't deny it. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what?" Emily asked. Claire looked at her, this girl who had learned to navigate loss with such grace, and felt her throat tighten. "That I'm not enough for you, for any of you. That one day you'll realize you deserve someone better, someone whole." The words hung in the air between them, raw and painful, and Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing what Claire had just confessed. Then Emily reached out and took Claire's hand, holding it between both of hers with a tenderness that belied her age. "My mum used to say something," she began, her voice soft but steady. "She said that families aren't built by blood or biology. They're built by the people who show up, who stay, who choose to love even when it's hard." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and Emily continued, her own voice trembling now. "You think you're not enough because you can't have kids, but Claire, you've been more of a mother to me and Liam than anyone could have been. You didn't give birth to us, but you chose us. Every single day you choose us, and that's what makes you family." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek, then another, and Emily squeezed her hand tighter. "You're not taking my mom's place," she said, her voice breaking. "You're helping to fill the space where it hurts, and that's not less than, that's everything." Claire pulled Emily into her arms, holding her close as they both cried, tears of grief, of healing, of love that had been growing quietly in the spaces between them. When they finally pulled apart, Emily smiled through her tears, a smile that held all the hope and resilience of someone who had learned that love comes in many forms, and all of them are valid. Claire wiped her eyes, feeling something shift inside her. A loosening of the grip fear had held on her heart. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe she had been measuring herself against the wrong standard all along. Maybe her worth wasn't determined by what she couldn't do, but by what she had already done, by the love she had given freely, by the ways she had shown up, by the choice she made every day to be present in the lives of people who had become her own. And maybe, just maybe, that was more than enough. Gabriel found Claire in the garden that evening, standing beneath the string lights he had hung years ago when his wife was still alive. The bulbs cast a soft golden glow over everything, turning the ordinary backyard into something that felt almost sacred. Claire didn't hear him approach at first. She was lost in thought, her arms wrapped around herself, her face tilted up toward the stars, as if she were searching for answers written in the sky. When Gabriel spoke her name, she turned, and he saw in her expression something he hadn't seen before. Peace. Not the fragile, tentative kind, but something deeper, something that had been hard-won through tears and honesty, and the courage to believe she was worthy of being loved. He walked toward her slowly, his hands in his pockets, his heart pounding with a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. "Emily told me about your conversation," he said, his voice gentle. Claire nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "She's wise beyond her years," she said softly. Gabriel smiled too, but there was something serious in his eyes, something that made Claire's breath catch. "She's right, you know," he continued, "about everything. You've given us so much, Claire, more than you realize, and I need you to know something." He paused, stepping closer, close enough that she could see the way the light reflected in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he pulled them from his pockets. "I'm not asking you to come to New York because I need help with the kids or the house. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Claire's heart stuttered in her chest, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Gabriel wasn't finished. "I know you've been hurt," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know someone made you believe that your value was tied to something you couldn't control. But Claire, you are not broken. You are not less than. You are everything I never knew I was looking for." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Claire's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm not good with speeches," Gabriel said, his own eyes glistening now. "But I know this, I love you, not for what you can give me, but for who you are, for the way you make my children laugh, for the way you've brought warmth back into our lives, for the way you've shown up every single day, even when you were afraid." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that caught the light and held it. "Would you marry me, Claire? Would you let us be your family, the way you've already become ours?" Claire couldn't speak. The words were trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat, tangled up with years of pain and doubt, and the overwhelming realization that she was being offered something she had stopped believing she deserved. So instead of speaking, she nodded, fiercely, desperately, joyfully, and then she threw her arms around Gabriel's neck and held on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had spent so long spinning out of control. He held her just as tightly, his face buried in her hair, and when they finally pulled back to look at each other, they were both crying and laughing at the same time. Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there. And as they stood together in the garden, wrapped in light and love and the promise of a future they would build together, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she was home, not because of a place, but because of the people who had chosen her, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and decided she was worth keeping. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift she had ever received. The wedding was small, intimate, and exactly what it needed to be. They held it in the backyard where Gabriel had proposed, beneath the same string lights that had witnessed the beginning of their forever. Emily stood beside Claire, her hand resting gently on Claire's arm, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected, Liam shouted, "No way!" with such conviction that everyone burst into laughter. Gabriel's eyes never left Claire's face as they exchanged vows, simple promises spoken with trembling voices and steady hearts. When Liam walked down the aisle carrying the rings on a small velvet pillow, his chest puffed out with pride, Claire felt her heart swell so full she thought it might burst. And when Gabriel kissed her, sealing the promises they had made, she heard Emily whisper behind her, "Mom would have loved her." It was a blessing and a benediction, and Claire knew in that moment that she had been welcomed not just into a family, but into a legacy of love that would carry them all forward. The move to New York was a whirlwind of packing boxes, goodbyes to neighbors, and the bittersweet feeling of leaving behind the house where everything had changed. But Claire didn't feel the same fear she had felt before. This time, she wasn't being thrown out into the cold. She was moving forward with people who loved her toward a future they would build together. The apartment in New York was smaller than the house they'd left behind, but it was bright and full of windows that let in the morning sun. Liam claimed the room with the view of the park, and Emily decorated hers with posters and fairy lights that made it feel like a sanctuary. Gabriel set up his home office, and Claire carved out a small corner for herself, a reading nook with a soft chair and a lamp, a place that was entirely hers. But the most remarkable transformation was the one that happened inside Claire herself. She began to take on small projects, volunteering at a community center, mentoring young women who had faced their own struggles, rediscovering passions she had abandoned when her life had fallen apart. Gabriel encouraged her at every turn, never letting her shrink herself to fit into a role she thought she was supposed to play. The children thrived in their new environment, making friends and exploring the city with the kind of wonder that only comes from feeling secure in the love that surrounds you. And at night, when the four of them gathered around the dinner table in their new home, sharing stories and laughter and the ordinary magic of daily life, Claire looked around and realized something profound. She had spent so many years believing that her inability to have biological children meant she could never be a mother. But sitting here, surrounded by the family she had chosen and who had chosen her, she understood that motherhood had never been about biology. It had always been about love, presence, and the daily choice to show up. And in that, she had become exactly what she was always meant to be, whole, worthy, and deeply, irrevocably loved. Sometimes, late at night when the city had gone quiet and the children were asleep in their rooms, Claire would stand by the window and look out at the glittering lights of New York. And in those moments, her mind would drift back to that frozen street, to the woman she had been, broken, discarded, convinced that her story had ended before it had truly begun. She remembered the weight of that suitcase in her trembling hands, the sound of the door slamming behind her, the crushing certainty that she had nothing left to offer the world. And then she would think of Gabriel's car stopping in the fog, of his voice cutting through the cold with a question that had changed everything. "Would you like to come with me?" She understood now that the question had never been about a ride or a place to stay. It had been an invitation into a life she didn't know she was allowed to have, a life where her value wasn't measured by what her body could or couldn't do, but by the love she carried in her heart and the choice she made every day to show up. Gabriel had said it best one evening as they sat together on the couch with his arm around her shoulders and the children sprawled on the floor playing a board game. He had looked at her with those steady, kind eyes and said, "Family isn't blood, Claire, it's choice." And she had felt something settle deep in her bones, a truth that had been waiting for her all along. She had spent so many years believing she was broken because she couldn't give birth. But here, in this apartment filled with laughter and light and the beautiful chaos of daily life, she had discovered something far more profound. She had given birth to a family anyway. Not through her body, but through her presence, her love, her unwavering commitment to the people who had become hers. Claire turned away from the window and walked back through the quiet apartment, pausing to adjust the blanket on Liam's bed, to close Emily's door a little more so the hallway light wouldn't wake her. She found Gabriel in their room, reading by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and when he looked up and smiled at her, she felt it again. That overwhelming sense of belonging, of home, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She climbed into bed beside him, and he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "You okay?" he whispered against her hair. Claire nodded, her eyes closing, her heart full. "More than okay," she whispered back. "I'm home." And for the first time in her life, she knew without a shadow of doubt that it was true. She had found her family, she had found her place, she had found herself. And nothing could ever take that away from her again. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that your worth is not defined by what you cannot do, but by who you choose to be, then please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like Claire's matter because they remind us that love comes in many forms, that families are built through choice and presence, and that redemption is always possible, even when we've stopped believing in it. Here at Crawl Plus Love, every story is a reminder that hope still exists, that hearts can heal, and that sometimes the family we choose becomes the one we were always meant to have. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are.